Hello and welcome to the program. My name is Michael Finney. Today I am joined by author Rick Cutler. Would you like to say hello, sir?
Hi, everybody.
So let's jump right in. Let's learn about you. Let's hear about who you are, where you're from, all of the interesting biographical information of your youth and maybe professional life outside of writing that people could find an interest in.
Well, I'm still just a wee little fishy in a very big pond, but I started when I was very young. My first story was one page long. It was Attack of the Slime Molds. My daughters found it in the attic and laminated it and gave it to me for Father's Day. So I don't know how they found it or what they were doing in the attic, but they did. And I've treasured that ever since. But I've always written, and I've always treated it like a hobby. I mean, I didn't really dedicate myself to doing it until I started listening to the Writer Dojo, which is a podcast by Larry Correia, Steve Diamond, and producer Jack Wilder. But along the way, I've had several careers. I was on an archaeological dig back when I was very young, digging up an Indian burial mound, respectfully, of course. I was also a tour guide. I spent 20 years in advertising, and then another 21 as a click monkey, all for major corporations. And amongst all those, I was diddling around with writing stories. And as a matter of fact, Attack of the Slime Molds was an inspiration for something else that got published. So never throw anything away.
Oh, for sure. You never know when an idea is going to have its time. Maybe in an early iteration just for framing, or maybe it finds new life and extends out into a greater piece, or maybe it becomes part of another work. You kind of recycle some of those ideas. That's all right.
Oh, yeah, exactly what happened.
So you said you were writing from a young age.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not like that, but I find it interesting for people that are. How did you nurture that? Maybe where did your first opportunity or success come from along the way?
Well, I've got a cautionary tale. Off and on, I treated it like a hobby, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a good hobby. It's a fun hobby. But when I was in college, I started trying to write a fantasy. I showed it to my best friend at the time, and he said, "You use too many big words," and it just crashed. I mean, I didn't go back to it for probably 20 years. And that was only because I started hanging out with some folks that were doing some writing. And I thought, well, I'll get back into it. I'll try my hand at it. But it's a cautionary tale because sometimes the people who are your first readers are not the right people for you to have read your stuff.
Yeah. Is that even a valid criticism? The words are too big in this word-based media. Come on.
Well, he's no longer with us, but I had nothing to do with that.
Okay. Oof. Took a dark turn there early on. Interesting. All right. You didn't have anything to do with that one. I see.
No, I did not. Yes, and I did not rent a backhoe, and nothing on my name is anywhere. So we need to move on.
Okay. Let's continue on with more about this emergence into the professional life of being a writer. What did it look like as you were exploring the form, exploring the landscape of being a writer, turning professional, becoming an author? Tell us about some of that.
I think the turning point for me that changed me from a hobbyist to someone who gets paid for what I write began with the insight, not my own, but that write every day. You can't treat it like I can only write when my muse talks to me. I don't have a muse, and I'm not amusing. So when I started writing every day, when I would take time and I would do it at the same time every day, I produced something that somebody liked. as a matter of fact, I'd written a whole novel, but it just took years. And again, like I said, I was treating it like a hobby. And I was starting to work on the next one, and I saw a message from Brennan Hankins. He's lives up in Alaska, and he said, "Hey, there's this new publishing house called Raconteur Press, and they're looking for stories about space cowboys." And what happened is I thought, "Oh, that's interesting." And the story I just written, one of the characters had a grandfather who limped because his legs were broken in a work camp. Well, I could backdate that a couple of 100 years and make that character's brother a cowboy. There we go. So I wrote the first space cowboy story, sent it off, and when I got the contract back, I about fell out of my chair. So they published it, and if you follow Raconteur Press at all, they had so many good stories to submitted for Space Cowboys. They just said, "Well, we'll do another volume." And so I wrote them. I said, "Hey, I got another story. Can I submit it?" And they said, "Well, we don't know what the track record is yet and how we're going to do that, but sure, go ahead." And they took it. And boy, when they took that, it just exploded in my head. I had a 3x5 card, and I wrote down 5 more stories, just one line for each one of them. And as their anthologies progressed and they kept on putting them out there, I kept on writing them, and here we are today.
Yeah, very nice. It's cool that things work out that way. These sort of kind of dipping a foot in, and then very quickly you're just running across the surface of the water, I feel like.
Yeah, and again, I tell people, what they tell you you're no good, don't give up. Do the who was it said that never give up and never surrender?
I think it was Churchill.
I was thinking of Disney, but that's okay.
I'm not sure. From Disney. I don't know.
Shows you how literate I am with history.
Well, that's all right. If you're writing science fiction, your mind is in the future anyhow,
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us maybe some of your influences growing up, who you were reading, who you respected as writers, anything along those lines?
And, at this time, I was reading for the enjoyment, which is probably what, really is guiding me now, is like, I want to write things that I would like to read. Influences, the early analog stories from the 70s. They would serialize different authors, and I loved Wolfling by Gordon R. Dixon, and also Tactics of Mistake. And I'll be honest, I haven't read everything that he's written, but those really hit me. And I was really entertained by Keith Laumer's stories on, and I'm not sure if I'm even pronouncing this correctly, Retief. He's an intergalactic diplomat. And he had a collection of short stories, and I just ate them right up. Loved doing that. Bertram Chandler, the Grimes series, kind of a Horatio Hornblower series. All were inspirational for me. And I loved the stories where the character is just an ordinary person, goes through extraordinary circumstances and comes out on top, sometimes in spite of themselves. Oh, I can't forget Harry Harrison with The Stainless Steel Rat. Great short stories bundled together in books, which is the inspiration that led to my current or upcoming book.
This is one of the interesting things when I do these interviews is just how varied people's influences are. I think that there's a lot of like really landmark writers that everybody latches onto, myself included, but there are always these short lists of, I don't want to say they're obscure writers, but let's say that they're not in that first round of short list of authors that everybody knows and reveres. And they always are people that like individuals like yourself latch onto and, carry a torch for, and potentially try to keep that fire burning in their own work.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's something that's happened for me too. I mean, I don't know how popular and how well known people would be today of some of the things that I really enjoyed like a kid. Space Relations by Donald Barr, I think it was. I think he wrote maybe 2 books, but that was one I kept on going back to. Obscure, probably nobody knows who that is or what it was. Anything You Can Do. Don't even remember the name of the author, but I remember that. I've got that on my shelf, as a matter of fact. The Man Whose Name Wouldn't Fit. Stuff that today is like, well, the science doesn't fit anymore. So, oh, gosh, you can't forget Edgar Rice Burroughs, John Carter of Mars.
Just finished listening to 2 different versions of audiobook productions of that. And
really?
I got to say, I kind of agree that the science doesn't necessarily carry over to today. The style is a little antiquated, not only from the science fiction angle, but just, I don't know, there's things that have been, we've kind of moved into some, I don't know, different era. You know, the references are antiquated. They're dated. There's nothing bad about it. You know what I mean? I listened to it twice, right. In fact, but it just, when you're listening to it and you're thinking about like, what are the things that we have popularized in the 100 years plus since then, it looks considerably different than that does. I mean, that's not to say that can't find an audience. I'm in it, obviously, but it might explain to a degree why the film adaptation of the story didn't land and kind of hit a successful gear as well. Yeah, I mean, this stuff happens. It is what it is. Whereas maybe comparing another contemporary like H.G. Wells, some of his science fiction angles, they still sort of can carry over in a variety of ways.
Yeah, and especially some of the old masters like that, you know, introduced concepts that we just take for granted now.
Right.
And going back and rereading some of the older books, you know, from 40 years ago, I'll go, oh, I thought I made that up. I obviously didn't. So,
yeah, it is that way, right?
Yeah, but that's okay. I put my own spin on it.
Yeah, for sure. You know, I think that's the real inventiveness of being a creative, being a writer. It's like we don't necessarily have to find a new story to tell. We just have to dress up these old stories in the fashion of the day. And that, let's talk about some of the writers doing that. Who in the scene today do you look to? Do you find inspiration from, or just admire the work that they're doing?
First one is going to be a pair of writers, Larry Correia and Steve Diamond. I am just in awe. Larry just this past week said, yeah, I've got 2 book deadlines in April. I'm going, 2 book deadlines? I mean, how the heck do you get that much done? But again, it's because he treats it like a job.
Sure.
He treats it, their favorite metaphor or analogy is, if you're a plumber, you can't come into work and say, oh, the plumbing muse isn't with me today. I don't feel like plumbing. I'll get to it tomorrow. If you're an accountant and you tell your boss the accounting muse is not there, you're going to be out the door looking for another job. So writing's the same way. You can harness that creativity if you exercise it every day like a muscle.
Any others?
Gosh, I'm trying to think off the top of my head what I've read recently. My real challenge is stopping myself to refresh and read other things that are out there.
Isn't it?
Right now I'm going back and read some of those old ones. I have a bookshelf of mostly signed hardbacks that were my favorites. And going back, and just what I say, I just reread Tactics of Mistake just last week. It's really hard for me to put my thumb on current writers that I'm following. Now, I will say that I do follow a lot of the new writers that are coming up through Raconteur, ones that are putting out books, full-length novels, like Nick Netherly. Nice writer. And he's got some great pieces like The Peace Child that just came out.
Yeah, they're doing a great job. Let's talk a little bit about Rack Press and how your relationship with them has developed, maybe how they treat their writers, anything about their practices and development, anything.
Well, I would recommend Rack Press to anyone and everyone. I am, I'm not in with, the big five book dealers, or publishers, I should say. But the level of transparency is, and dedication. Let me put it this way. I was told that they were going to, I submitted a manuscript to Rack Press for the novel, and I hadn't heard anything yet, but they accepted it, and they just, on a handshake, said, yeah, we're going to do this. I knew I didn't have to wait for a contract for them, because if they said, we're going to do this, they're going to do it, period. And in the previous anthologies that they've done that I've been included in, they're using somebody called PubShare, and I can right now go and look at how many anthologies that I'm in have been sold yesterday, in the past month, in the past 2 years, if I really need to start looking at those things. There's no question of how many books have been sold. They're very transparent about your pay. 3 years ago, my first story was in the Space Cowboy first volume. I'm still getting paid on that thing. People are still buying that book, that anthology, and I'm still getting money. Now, let's be honest. Like I said, I'm still a wee fishy. My royalties in 3 months, I can take my wife out to dinner at Olive Garden.
Hey.
That's okay. People are enjoying the books. They're enjoying what the Rack Press is putting out. Why not be fun? And this is not a knock on folks who want to communicate a message. Maybe they've got something deep in their soul they really need to say. Oh, they're cool with that. Their point is, though, first tell a great story. And if you get a message in there, that's cool too. But tell the story, because we want to entertain. So, and, meeting with them, running into them at conventions, they have just been so welcoming and friendly. And I just really appreciate the business model that they're developing, and the fact that they are nimble enough to change, to say, you know what, doing this didn't work for us or our writers, so let's just do something different, and they'll change direction. Just to make sure that things work out, that things sell. And they are so adamant about, no, do not give us anything for free. Everybody must be paid.
Yeah, that's great.
Oh, it is. A friend of mine is he's a rising a voice, whatever you call that, the narrator. And he'd like to get more into the business. And he said, hey, I'll read your first story for free for you. I said, well, let me check, because, somebody else has got the rights to it. And I, told them, and they said, nobody does it for free. That's one issue. If you want an audio, you own the rights right now, which their contract is so awesome. 1 year after publication on the short stories, I got the rights back on my story. I can republish it. I can repackage it. I can do anything I want to with it. And they tell you in the contract when you're going to get it back. Boy, I'll tell you, I just picked this paper here. Let me tell you, on the novel or the book that's coming out for me in April, the structure, they sent me a schedule that said by 2/27 that we're going to do the structural edits, copy edits, do 3/23, upload to KDP 3/30, pre-order 4/9, live, 4/23. It's like, oh my gosh, it's no like, is there going to be a contract sent, or do they like it, or what's the schedule? They'll lay it right out for you. Again, I'm kind of like the fly in a jar full of vinegar. It's the only place I've ever been, so I think it's the sweetest place there is. I haven't been published by anybody else, but I tell you, I would not be afraid to sell something to somebody who's using the kind of models that Raconteur Press uses. And it's like they said, as long as people are buying the anthologies that we put out, you're going to still get paid.
Yeah, I feel like every time I talk to an author working with them, they share similar sentiments. And getting into some of the nuts and bolts, I think that it's an attractive scenario. The transparency is incredibly valuable, particularly at this point when there has been so much consolidation in the publishing industry, to where it's really tough to kind of know how things are developing or where they're going to fall. To just have a company that's like, look, we're all writers, we're all creatives, we're all trying to do something here, but we also know that it takes everybody to be able to do something, and being able to have the data tracking at this point in time, I think that's critical. We as independent creatives putting things out, many platforms are allowing us to track data inbound and outbound. And I just think that is now becoming kind of a requirement for us to be able to make new things and pivot into projects that our audiences want.
Yeah, I think there's a rising independent publishing phenomena. And that's probably what makes folks like them so nimble. They don't have, decades of, here's how we do things. I heard a rumor once that somebody told Rick Press, well, you can't do that. And it was kind of like, watch me. And they did. So, and another thing, these folks are just so darn friendly. They like their authors. They like to chat. You can find them in the bar at a convention and say, come on down, sit down with us. What's going on? I suppose when they have 1,000 and 2,000, authors, under their press, that might not be as easy to do. But for right now, I'm just enjoying the fact that these are good folks, stand-up people all the way around.
Yeah. Why don't we talk about Colt Ostergaard, A Man with a Gun? When is it coming out?
Oh, yeah. One of my favorite people.
When does it come out? When? How many stories are in it? Anything like that?
All right. Well, here's the structure. Well, let me back up and mention Professor James Gunn. And that's not the Jim Gunn from Hollywood. This is a professor at KU over in Kansas. He was a writer. He was also a professor of, I believe, English there. And something he said stuck with me, and that was, sell it twice. And I said, well, what do you mean, sell it twice? Well, here's what he did. Way back in the late 70s, there was a TV show called The Immortal. Well, that was based on one of his books. And those books were a combination of short stories that he had written and sold. So he sold his short stories twice, once as a short story in different magazines, and then again the short stories as a compiled book. And I've taken that to heart. So after I wrote the first Colt Ostergaard story in Space Cowboys, and then the second book got published in the next anthology, second short story. And I, as I mentioned, had this, list of stories that I could go into and talk about. I realized that was what I was aiming to do, is to take all the short stories about this one character, put them together. And what I did is, there are 6 of them that were published. Let me back up and say that. And they are published in historical sequence. She taken from his first, quote, adventure to, one of his last ones. Well, I took those and I said to myself, I want to give somebody or whoever buys this book more than just reprints. I fiddled with a couple of the stories and added some other things to them. But what I did is to knit them all together. I wrote interconnecting scenes between each story, so that one story stops and there's a scene that connects it to the next story, and so there's 7 additional stories besides the 6 that were published and are out there. I wanted to give folks who bought this something new, not just a rehash of what's already out there. Yeah, some people would say, hey, when are they ever going to bundle these all together? Well, this is it. They're all bundled together, but there's twice as much as what's out there already. And I felt the obligation. I felt, that I wanted to give folks more than just a reprint. And that's what this is. It does follow him through many, many years. And ends up, as somebody just described for me today, my copy editor said it was a bittersweet ending. And she loved hating my villains. High praise as far as I'm concerned. So now Colt is the solar system that they're in. Again, it's a far, far away from Earth, and this particular solar system has been cut off for around about 900 years. So it's one of those lost colony stories. Well, you've got two planets, one, neither of which are actually, quote, fell back into, the Dark Ages. And the one that he's from is using the cowboy motif to deal with the issues, their environment, and dealing with, recurring hard, environmental things happening to them. It was an architect back in the late 1800s who said form follows function. And he was talking about, building bridges and things like that. And Davis Moore, sociologists, picked that up and said, it's the same with society. Form follows function in a society. If you've got something that is a function, the form will follow that function. So I took that and said, okay, well, and as Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. So I married those together, those two concepts, in that it's not a repeat of the Old West because, they have, battle armor, they have rail guns, they have DNA sniffers, things like that. But to deal with the issues, everyday issues, they found that the form of a cowboy, the independent spirit, rugged, morally straight, and willing to, go down in the dust to do the right thing. That individualism, rugged individualism, has made their planet. And they just, again, a rhyme with the Old West. It worked. That form is following the function of conquering a frontier. So that's the basis for that. And a little bit of competition with their sister planet. So, as you know, writers love to hear themselves talk. And so I lost the thread of where we were going with this.
Well, we were just talking about the release, what's included, when it comes out.
Oh, yeah. That's I did mention this earlier. The pre-order date is April 9, and it's live on Amazon on 4/23, April 23rd, in paperback and in digital.
Very cool. Yeah, happy to hear about your development and your success. Obviously, that relationship with Rack Press is developing great for you and turning into real opportunity for yourself, but other writers, and perhaps most importantly, the readers looking for fresh new works.
There are a lot of good voices and new voices in their anthologies, and so I can't help but recommend them enough.
Rick, I want to say thanks for taking the time to talk with me and share your thinking and talking about your work.
Thank you. Appreciate being invited to chat with you.